My name is Mo and I produce metal, and today I'm going to go through all the steps you need for programming and producing MIDI guitars for metal. I've been working with MIDI guitars in one form or another for around 5 years, so I have a pretty good understanding of when they work, when they don't work, what the different libraries bring to the table, and so on. I'm gonna start by talking use cases. When would I use MIDI guitars in my productions? Then I'm gonna go over 3 different options for different libraries for you. I'm gonna go over the strengths and weaknesses of each of these libraries and which one would fit you the best. And then I'm gonna jump into the actual programming of different parts. And finally, I'm gonna jump into tone crafting some different kinds of tones for you guys. This video took a lot of time and effort to make, so I would really appreciate if you would put a like on it to show that you appreciate the content. Thank you. Let's get started. Firstly, I want to talk about use cases. When do I personally use MIDI guitars? The first and most obvious one is the demo stage of a song. MIDI guitars are an amazing tool for making demos because you can create a really good sounding demo, so you get an idea of what the final product will sound, but at the same time you can easily change parts, move them around, change notes in riffs and so on. You can really hone in on the structure of a song before you commit to recording, which is gonna save you a lot of time. It's also amazing for me, who is not a guitarist, to actually be able to communicate and understand the guitarist of a band. Like, I understand how the instrument will sound. I get some sense of like what is realistic, what is not realistic, because some of the libraries will show you like impossible positions on the fretboard and so on. Here I have an example of a song for Red Keep. It's an unreleased song where I was using Hydra for making the demo of the song. So the process here was that the band sent me all the MIDI and I translated it to my MIDI guitars. I made some changes in the structure and then I sent it back to Lance, the guitarist in Red Keep, so he could record it for real. So I'm going to play you first the mix with the MIDI guitars and then the mix with the final recording of the guitars. So as you can hear, the MIDI guitars sound really good. Of course, if you have a great guitarist like Lance, who has a great sounding guitar, live guitar will always sound better, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. This gives us a really efficient and great sounding way to communicate song ideas back and forth, and it's super easy for me to make changes. And I'm gonna use the same song for the next use case example, which is layering and production. So for some parts where you want some extra spice on the guitars, which is just layered underneath the main guitar tone, you can get away with using programmed guitars even in a finished mix. So here is a great example of a part where I wanted to add some extra sizzle on top. Here is the isolated programmed guitar part. I wanted to add an harmonic part that was above the main guitar tone on this track, and here you can hear the finished result. So it's just adding some sparkle on top, which is, making the part come alive, in my opinion. Another really common trick is to add a dissonant layer. So here you can see the main guitar tone, it's chugging away on a low F, but then I'm adding an extra programmed layer which is playing on a low E, so half a step below the main guitar tone. This creates a great sounding dissonance which just makes the part sound super heavy. So here you can have a listen in isolation. and then I'm going to play you the full mix. Final example of how I use the MIDI guitar as a production tool is that I commonly use tremolo guitar parts, which actually sound super realistic because they are playing this super fast picking part, which is, yeah, really static sounding. So the MIDI guitar is not that far off a real guitar, but more fundamentally, you have very, very much reverb on this kind of tone. So this kind of sound. So in the context of the mix, it sounds, yeah, realistic enough, I would say. Have a listen. Our next use case is actually to use the guitar tone for the finished song. Now, this will depend really, really heavily on what kind of song you have. If you have high-pitched pop guitars that have a very high volume, it's gonna sound very bad. But generally, like the lower tuning you have on your song, so really low-tuned metal stuff, generally sounds quite all right on programmed guitars because the note definition gets way muddier when it's lower tuned. And particular like shugs or just really hard played sustains sound really good on programmed guitars. So for that stuff, it can sound quite realistic. Now, where the realism struggles is when you play in a higher register and also like lead parts, lower gain parts, all of those sound a bit worse. But yeah, it's really possible to get a realistic sounding low-tuned rhythm guitar tone with programmed guitars, in my opinion. Now, before we go on, I have to address the elephant in the room, which is that in metal, there is a lot of elitism that is going on. And what I mean with this is that when you post something that has programmed guitars, automatically you get a lot of people that are like, oh, this is not real music. Oh, the band can't play this, or, you know, whatever. And in most cases, it's like I say, I program the demo and then I send it to a real guitarist who plays it way better sounding. It will always sound better with a proper guitarist on a really great sounding guitar. However, the bar is a bit higher, like the mediocre guitarists have no place in modern production if you can get the programmed guitars to sound this great. And I can only speak from my personal experience, which is that if I didn't have programmed guitars, the barrier of entry for me to get into music production, and specifically metal, would be so much higher since I don't play guitars, I play drums. So I would have to invest so much time and money into learning a completely new instrument. Whereas now I could instead learn the programmed guitars, making them sound really good. And then I could get all my creativity out, which led me to making music of my own, which led me to eventually working with bands and producing music for them. So it has allowed me to make like a life in music, which I'm super thankful for. But yeah, I'm not sure if that would have happened if I didn't have access to all of these amazing tools. So my viewpoint of it is that, one, it makes creativity much more accessible to all people, which I think is a great thing. Number two, you can get decent results from them, which I also think is great, like for your demo or even your finished production. And three, I always think that a great guitarist has a place in the productions. It's the same with bass or drums. Okay, so yeah, that's my viewpoint on the whole elitism in metal thing. Next, I'm gonna get into a comprehensive view of 3 different libraries. I'm gonna go over the Hydra, which I've used a lot in my videos. I'm gonna go over the Odin III from Solemn Tones, and I'm going to go over Axure from Sound Study Studios. Now, I have links in the description for the Odin and for the Axure, so if you want to support the channel and also get a little bit of a discount using my codes, you can check out the description to pick up the Odin III or the Axure. So I'm going to rate these different libraries on a few different factors. The first one is how easy the library is to use, especially for beginners. How realistic the library sounds, if it has features to enhance the realism of the playing. How many articulations the library has and how easily they are to customize. Tuning, meaning like how low and how high does the guitar go. Most of these libraries are sampled down to a certain tuning and then pitch shifted way down, but still if the pitch shifting is done inside of the plugin, I find it way more convenient than having to do it myself. I'm going to start by going over the Odin III from Solemn Tones, and here is a riff I made using this guitar. So straight out of the bat, you can hear that it really excels at the low tune stuff. So starting with ease of use, I think this plugin is amazing. I would give it a 5 out of 5 in this factor because it's really easy to navigate and the options are quite limited, but you really have what you need. Starting here with the main tab, you have some different options. You have the DI signal. You have a rhythm tone. You have a lead tone, so it has some delay going on, and the clean tone is gonna sound like shit on this one, but yeah. Generally, for these libraries, it has to do all of their processing inside of the plugin for their amp tones. So number one, it means that they have to use like their own amp software, which isn't always like the best. Now I know Solemn Tones has an amp on their own, which is great. And also then they need to limit the processing that takes place because yeah, more process intensive means more CPU for the end user. So generally, I would say that the DI tone is what is really, yeah, the thing that you're looking for, and then making the tone yourself inside of your DAW. So I'm gonna stick with the DI tone here. You have the options to have left and right pan or center. So if you have center, it's like a mono signal. But yeah, we are looking for the stereo sound. I love this feature. It brings us a bit over to the realism part, but you can humanize here. So I have 13% humanize on, which is creating slight variations in the velocity, maybe as well the timing, but it's very slight in that case. You also have different bridge pickups here you can choose, which are altering the sound. So if I engage the tone here, you can listen to the difference. So a bit darker. For rhythm tones, I generally go for the bridge defined, I believe the def stands for. Here playing, I have not messed with this super much, but yeah, I just have this auto chord delay engaged, which is creating a slight delay for when you play several notes. Because if you play a guitar in real life and say you're hitting the top 3 strings, you're gonna have a slight delay when you hit the strings. And this is emulating that. So the 3 notes are not playing at the exact same time, but there's a slight delay, which is, again, for realism, amazing. So because of this feature and the built-in humanization feature, I would give it 5 out of 5 for realism as well. And here you have some more advanced settings, so you can like increase the pick attack here. Realign phase is just making sure there are 0 phase issues. And here you can change the tuning of the guitar. If you want to have an accurate representation of the fretboard here, it doesn't change the samples played at all. And then moving on to the key switches, which contain the articulations, You can see you have so many articulations to choose from. You have alt-picked, down-picked, up-picked. I believe from standard it's alt-picked, but if you program at a lower velocity, it will go over to palm mutes, which is also very beginner-friendly. The thing I'm missing here, articulation-wise, is the ability to customize which key switches are triggering which articulations. So I would like to, for instance, be able to turn off certain articulations that I don't use. Maybe I want the down mute dead at a D0, what do I know? This is a more advanced request, but for me personally, that's what is giving it a 4 out of 5 for articulations. But pure sound-wise, as long as you learn this kind of different articulations key switches, it's amazing. And tuning-wise, it goes down to a low C, so double drop C, which to me is like the lowest tuning you'll ever need. If you go any lower than this, it's basically just noise. So if you would like to go lower, you need to pitch shift yourself. But yeah, it's a 5 out of 5. You don't need more than double drop C. Otherwise, it's just silly. If you're recording at a super low tuning, it's easy for the guitar to lose its tuning because it's so loose. So then you can use the programmed guitar as a reference tuning-wise as well. Overall, the Odin III is an amazing option if you're a beginner. It's super user-friendly, it's realistic, the sound is amazing, I would say. So it's really just about jumping in and start creating music. I'm gonna go over the tone for the Odin III a bit later in the video along with the other libraries. Okay, now we're moving on to the next library, which is the Axure from Study Sound Audio. Now, as soon as you load up this plugin, you can see that it looks absolutely fantastic. It doesn't have so many options, which is great for just jumping in. You can change the input level, the pick attack, the release, and the shug, like how long the shugs are, which I think is amazing. You can then engage or disengage this phase drive. If you just listen to the DI, you can hear that it's kind of a overdrive sound. It's also going to make sure that there are no phasing issues between the sides, so there's no canceling out into mono when you have one on the left and one on the right. Speaking of which, one of the weaknesses I feel in this guitar is that there is no built-in double tracking in the plugin, so you need 2 instances. You need one of instance 1 and one of instance 2, which has this pink color instead of the blue. So you need one version left and one version right. So it's a little bit more tricky to jump in, especially if you're a beginner. This can be a bit daunting, I guess, but still, it's all right. And while you're inside of the plugin, you have, quite limited options, which I think is strength. You can then check the key switches here. So I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5 for ease of use and also a 4 out of 5 for the articulations. You have all the articulations you need, even if you have a bit less than the Odin III, I would say. You can't customize them here as well. And one of the reasons I love customization is that if I want to check the tone on the Axure instead of the Odin, I then need to translate all of the key switches from the Odin over to the Axure instead of doing a preset which has the key switches in the positions I like them, so I could just, switch between the plugins more easily. Realism-wise, I think that the Axure sounds quite realistic, but it doesn't have any built-in features like the Odin for increasing or decreasing the humanization, so I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 in that regard as well. Sound-wise, though, I think this is where this guitar library really excels. Now, the Odin also sounds fantastic, but I think the Axure is like 1 or 2% even better. It takes a little bit more work to make it sound super realistic, in my opinion, but like the finished result, it's as close to a finished mixed tone as I've come. So I'm just gonna have you listen to this tone with Axure. I'm gonna switch between the Odin and the Axure and you can hear the difference. So here I programmed at pretty much max velocity for the sustains. And you can hear that the Axure, it does sound amazing. The Odin maybe has a little bit more smack on the sustains. So yeah, it's just an amazing sound. It maybe sounds a little bit more chunky, I would say, the Axure, and the Odin a little bit more defined when it comes to this super low tuning. It's at a double drop C sharp. Overall, I think that the Axure, it's matching the Odin perhaps slightly better even in the sound, but yeah, super even. A little bit less beginner friendly, but once you get it going, it's sounding amazing. I have a link as well as a $10 discount code for the Axure in the description below. And now the final option that I'm going to show you is the MIDI guitar that has been featured most on my channel because it's the one that I started using first, which is the Odin III Hydra by Impact Soundworks. Now here you can listen to the instrument in action. And immediately hear a difference because it only goes down to drop E, which is, yeah, a bit of a shame, but it has been mostly in the last years that the tuning has gotten super low. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a pass for this, but still in the tuning department, it's just a 4 out of 5 for me because now I need to transpose it myself. So it's quite simple to do, but yeah, I have to go down to a C sharp here. So I'm gonna go 3 semitones down. So starting with ease of use, this plugin is notoriously hard to use if you're a beginner. It has so many options here. You can change like the bite of the guitar, which is changing the frequency response. Pick attack here. Here you actually have a transpose feature inside of the plugin. I'm still using Neural DSP one because I think it sounds a bit better. You have anti-repetition, which is great for realism. You also have an articulations tweaking page here. You can change, yeah, just a lot of stuff that I've never even touched. I can see as a beginner that this seems a little bit daunting. The console is just for doing tones inside of the plugin. There are none that sound particularly great in my opinion, so I've never used built-in tones. And here you have the articulations page. So you have so many articulations to choose from. As I said, can be a bit tricky for a beginner, but here you can choose whether to have a velocity key switch. So if it's triggering for certain velocities, or you can have a key to switch. You can also choose if it's latch or no latch. So what this means is that if a key switch is latched, then if I press C1, it will continue to have this key switch until I press another key switch. If I don't have it on latch, it will only play for the amount that the key switch is active. Now, normally for other libraries, it's set to no latch by default. Realism-wise, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. It has this anti-repetition feature built in, but for instance, if you have the 1 and the 2 guitars here selected for double tracking, you have some phase issues, which is why you need to do the 1 and the 4. Again, super confusing, but not the greatest for realism. Articulations though, this is where the plugin really shines. I love the customization that you can do. I can disengage and engage different articulations. This is like, yeah, the gold standard, maybe a little bit more streamlined and beginner friendly would be amazing. But anyway, I think this is the gold standard for articulations that other companies should strive for. So yeah, that's the Hydra. Let's compare it to the Odin and the Axure for this riff, and you will get some idea of what it sounds like. Now there is some difference tone-wise, but still I think that it's quite obvious that the Odin is a bit more chunky on the really low notes than the Hydra. Still, yeah, you can get a great sound of the Hydra, so sound-wise I think it still holds up super fine. Okay, cool. So now let's get into programming different parts in a song. I'm gonna use the Odin III as the example here. As you can see here, since the Odin III has so great humanization, I am not worrying too much about the velocities. There is some variation, but since it's already altering it through the humanization feature, I can pretty much have max velocity on all the low notes and it will still sound quite realistic. But yeah, let's say I want to create a chordy part like this. And I want to make it sound realistic. I am then going to change the velocity slightly for the different notes. And I'm then thinking about, okay, which notes would be harder picked, which are the down picked ones. So here I'm going to start with the down picked ones and then to an upstroke. And here we can also change a bit. So I'm going to go through. That's the extent of what I'm doing realism-wise. I am not changing the timing of the notes, actually. Because if you have a real guitar, 99% of the time in a modern metal setting, it's gonna be edited to the grid. So this is emulating a well-edited real performance. So the differences are just in the velocity. So let's say I want to extend the chord a bit with another note, like with a minor chord. It's very easy to do. And then it comes to using the key switches. So here, I want this note to be a slide down. And in the Odin, then I go to the key switch list and I have a look here that F sharp -2 is a slide fast to down. So it's gonna be a faster slide, which is what I'm looking for. And then I'm just adding it here below this note, and then it's gonna trigger a slide here. So instead of this, it's this. Let's say I wanted these ones to be harmonics. Let's have a look here, and I see that it's A-1. So it's very easy to experiment with different articulations. And here you can see I have some chugs here at the G0. So using articulations is as simple as that, really. For rhythm parts, I generally keep the velocity super high if the tuning is low. But yeah, if I bring up the tuning, you will instantly hear that the realism falters. Still, the Odin III makes it sound pretty good, but to my ear it still sounds slightly more fake than the more low-tuned stuff, which is by its nature less defined. Now here is an example of a lead part which I am using the Hydra for, and this is an example of a layer that I would be comfortable in using in a final mix. So it's a tapping part. I am using the tapping articulation, which is at D-1, and it sounds like this. Here's an example of how I'm using this in the mix. I am adding some synths and stuff underneath. The effect sounds pretty realistic and very cool. Then you can bring in octave. Programming lead parts otherwise is a bit more tricky, I would say. It can handle simple leads like this. Quite well, especially if it's layered quite low. You can get away with using this in a final mix. If you're programming like a solo or so, it is super difficult to make it sound realistic. It's yeah, it's possible, but it needs a lot of expertise and a lot of work. So generally, if it's like a lead line that is supposed to be super in front and not just behind the vocals or something, I always want it to be recorded for real. Here is a example of a octave line using the lead guitar, which I also commonly do. So I'm not super worried about realism here actually, because it's gonna be layered pretty low in the mix. So yeah, it works well even if it doesn't sound super realistic. Now here's a cool example if you want to create a clean guitar tone. I'm going to use the Odin III for this. I'm just going to add a linear amp here, and I'm then increasing the auto chord delay to 30-second notes, which will create this slow strumming effect, like ring, automatically without having to do any work yourself. One thing is that I noticed that sometimes it strums up and sometimes it strums down. So if you want to be a bit more controlling about this, you could just have 30-second notes. And this is what I usually do with Hydra, is that I just stagger them like this to create this strummed sound. And in the mix, I think this would sound pretty all right. For tremolo parts, I usually just use the tremolo articulation. So here I have an instance of the Hydra, where the only articulation enabled is the tremolo one. And then I just program at 100 velocity these notes, and still it sounds great. Okay, so now let's go through my tones for this tutorial. And I'm gonna start with the Odin tone. So this is the main rhythm tone that I'm using. So just straight out of the box, here's the DI sound. This is another extra use case for you, is that if you have a guitar recording but are unsure how the DI should sound, you can just use the Odin or another great sounding library to reference a great sounding guitar DI. I am starting with an EQ before the amp. I'm gonna engage the amp before that to really show you what it's doing. Removing all of this gunky stuff. This was a resonance I found that I didn't like. Removing some mids here. Then I'm using the 14 nameless amp. I am using the pedals before with these settings. Then the amp with this setting. Then I have a down-tuned IR from Bogren Digital called Lust Control. And finally the EQ with these settings. Next, some tape saturation. Fattening it up a ton. Unfiltered audio basement, my favorite plugin for removing some muddy frequencies around 300-400 Hz. Some soothe, just removing some resonances and harshness. Next, some compression, just very subtly keeping it very level. Doing 1 to 2 dB at max. And finally, just these very small EQ moves. As you can see, it was not a lot of work required to make this guitar sound great. Now the Axure, it's pretty much the same, except that it has a different EQ before the amp, and also it has this EQ after the amp. For my tremolo tone, I am just using the Omega amp. The amp doesn't matter as much here before the reverb, because it's gonna be super verby after we're done. Then just shimmer the great sounding reverb from Valhalla. and just removing some highs and lows. The lead guitar tone, I'm using the Pliny for. Again, you can use any guitar amp as you want. I am just using the standard IR here, and I also have a lot of effects on it. Here I also have a radio effect going on, which is just using, the radio effect preset in the archetype Nolly. Alright, so that about sums my tutorial up. If you are interested in picking up the Axure or the Odin, check out the links in my description below. If you have any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to put them in the comment section below. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.